this video, we are going to take a look at inherited or child scope available in AngularJS. First of all, what exactly is inherited or child scope? And as part of this slide, we are going to cover the child scope or inherited scope, whatever you call it as, with respect to controllers, but not really the directives yet. So in the next slide, we are going to discuss about directives. So what exactly is inherited or child scope? Imagine I have a view, that is, I have a controller here which is called EMP, and that particular controller, whenever you define it, is obviously going to have its own scope to be attached with that. And in this case, imagine the scope is having one member called name, and that is having a value called jag. And now I have another controller defined inside the parent controller. So in this case, you can see I have EMP details which is inside EMP. So I have two controllers, and the second controller is actually nested inside the first controller. So that says that it will have its own scope, and usually it is called as a child scope or even the inherited scope. So why we call this one as inherited or child scope? First of all, this scope actually sits inside the main scope. So if you do not have the main scope here, we are not going to have the child scope either. So first of all, we are going to have the main scope to be created, and after that, as we have the child controller here or a nested controller here, it is going to have a new scope to be defined exclusively for that particular child controller. And this child controller, as I mentioned, is inherited. So inherited from what? Inherited from the parent controller. So whenever I say inherited, it is typically the same JavaScript based inheritance. So which means whenever you are having prototype based JavaScript inheritance in your applications, the same thing gets applied here as well. So if you are familiar with prototype based JavaScript inheritance, it is the same thing which actually happens here. So a new scope, that is nothing but this child scope, gets created based on the inheritance from the main scope. So whenever I say inherited, all those particular members available in the parent will also be made automatically available to the child scope as well. So as it is prototypically inherited, all the members from the parent scope are automatically available to the child scope. You need not define them, but they are indeed automatically available. So now you can see whenever I say name here, this value name in the parent controller and this value name in the child controller will have the same value called jag to be displayed. Next, a child scope can also have its own members. So which means in this case the child scope is defining two new members called salary and department number, which actually sits within this boundary, and those members are not going to be available in the parent at all. So parent do not see any members inside the child. However, the child can see all the members inside the parent, and whenever you bind to those members, those values will be automatically pulled from the parent and assigned or data bound to the respective elements. So this is pretty important. A child scope can override parent members by redefining their own. So if you can get back a bit, you can see we actually inherited this particular member. So which means this member, even though it is available in the parent, it is actually made available to the child through the inheritance. But the moment you assign a new value to the child, which means imagine I would like to have a new value Scott to be actually added to a member called name inside the child scope, what happens is that it actually removes whatever it has already got, and it will be overridden by a new member called name, which is available only to the child scope. So the name, whatever you have in the parent, is still available in the parent. However, the definition of that particular name is completely overwritten inside child scope. But it is not just ending there. We can still access the parent scope members using $parent, which we are going to see in a second. So this is pretty important. Whenever you have any kind of members which are actually overwritten in your child scope, you can still access the parent related scope members using $parent. Okay, this is pretty much about a child scope or inherited scope with respect to the controllers. So let us jump on to the directives. So imagine I have a simple markup something like this, and you can see the controller currently is sample, and obviously whenever I define a controller, it is going to have its own scope. And you can see I have a scope with two members A and B with 10 and 20 values respectively, and those two values are automatically going to be rendered as part of these AngularJS expressions, which looks straight. Now imagine I have a new div created with its own directive called message, and you can see the definition of the div right here, directive right here. So I'm using the same directive right in here, so which means I'm going to have a new element to be created which will be decorated with this directive, which means all the functionality of this directive is going to be applied to this div as well. Now you can see there is something like a new attribute called scope. The moment this is added, you can understand like a new scope gets created exclusively for this area, which means this particular directive related element is going to have its own scope created. And again, as you mentioned scope equal to true, this particular scope is obviously going to have an inherited scope right from its parent. If you do not specify scope equal to true, then by default it is going to be false, which means scope equal to false. When you define scope equal to false, you are essentially saying that you wanted to use the shared scope. So if you do not specify the scope attribute here, or if the attribute says scope equal to false, then we can say something like that particular scope, whatever it is going to create, is nothing but the shared scope. So indeed it is not going to create any kind of scope there, but it just only accesses the parent scope. But the moment you specify scope equal to true, then it actually creates a new scope and actually inherits all the attributes or all the members from the parent. So that says that we are going to have A and B to be automatically inherited into the child scope. And these two values can also be used or data bound as part of this particular element. I also would like to say, like, whenever you mention C equal to 30 here, this is pretty much similar to what I have explained earlier. This C is only made available to child scope, but it is not relative to the parent scope at all. So the parent scope will never see the members of the child scope. And still, you can overwrite all the members from the parent just like we have seen in the previous slide. So let us jump into a couple of examples and examine how this child scope really works with respect to the parent scope. So in this case, I have a pretty basic HTML and JavaScript. So in the HTML, all I have is just the body, and you can see inside the body I'm decorating with app, and I have ng controller, which is actually sample. So the same app and sample are actually defined right here. And I also defined another controller, so for now I just wanted to get rid of this guy. So you have just only one controller at the moment, and I would like to enhance our JavaScript in such a way that a couple of members are made available through the scope object itself. So I'm going to say $scope .a equal to 10 and similarly $scope .b equal to 20. And now in order to access those two members right inside our HTML, I'm going to switch to HTML here, and I'm going to say, okay, so this is from sample controller, and the value of A is A and value of B is B. So let us make sure everything is working fine. So I need to have my web server to be executed. So I just wanted to keep my web server running, and now I can access a01.html, and now you can see I have a equal to 10 and b equal to 20. So let me open the developer tools, which we are going to work with pretty soon. And let me open this inspect, and the moment I type in angular.element of $0 means that is nothing but the current element you have chosen, .scope. So I would like to see what exactly is available inside the scope, and you can see the ID of this scope currently is 2, and we have two members like A and B. Okay, let us switch back to our HTML, and in this case I would like to have an input value data bound to A. So which means I would like to have a text box, and that particular text box should have two-way binding to the member A, so that I can really modify the value of A as part of our particular controller. Okay, so I go in here, I press F5, and now you can see I have A, and the moment I modify this, you can see it is actually modifying the value of A right here. Okay, so let me go back to this one, and let me add a new controller called sample2. So I just wanted to copy this one, and I just wanted to say sample2 here, and inside sample2 I would like to have two new variables called C and D to be added, and in this case I would like to call this one as 30 and this one as 40. Okay, and now I would like to switch back to a01.html and create a new div which actually goes with the new controller. So I'm going to say div id equals div2, and at the same time I'm going to say ng controller equals sample2. So this is the new controller I'm going to work with. And as part of this one, whenever we say a new controller inside another controller, obviously we are going to have a new child scope to be created exclusively for this area. So in this case I would like to say sample2, and as part of the sample2 I would like to display those members like C and equals D as well. So I would like to have both of those values to be displayed. So let me see whether they are working. So I press F5, and now you should be able to see sample2 having value C and D with 30 and 40 respectively. So let me have a quick HR here so that both are separate. And as I mentioned, this particular controller is going to have this new scope to be created, which is supposed to be the child controller from the parent, and whenever it is a child controller inherited from the parent, all these values should also be made available through the child. So the same thing whatever I have in place there can also be written here, but instead I would like to say sample2. And you can see all I'm doing is accessing A and B from the child controller, even though those are defined in the parent controller, and on top of that I'm still accessing the child controller related members. So I select all of those, press F5, and still you can see I'm able to access A and B from the parent controller, and C and D which are exclusive to child controller as well. Okay, now if I modify this, now you can see it is not only modifying the parent related value, but it also does modify the child because it is the same value available there. So let me refresh this and see where this is inheriting from and how it is inheriting from. So I go to inspect, and now you can see I'm at the child scope level. So let me get the child scope value, the child scope object, and you can see I have ID as 3, and let me go to the parent one as well. And this is the parent one. So the parent is actually having the ID as 2, and it has got two members. The child is having a value of ID as 3, however it has got two members C and D, and we do not have A and B here, but still we are able to access A and B because the child scope is inherited from the parent scope, and you can see the inheritance is made available through the JavaScript prototypical inheritance, and that is made available through this guy. So if you open this, you are going to see the parent related ID, which is 2. So the child is 3, which is inheriting from the parent marked with ID 2. So you can see the parent is nothing but ID 2, and the parent ID 2, along with ID 2 you also have two more members A and B, which are actually being inherited by the child, and thus A, B, C, D are all the members available right from the child scope. And again, as I mentioned, you can still access the parent related values by just saying $parent. So if you open $parent, you are going to still see the same kind of values whatever we have in place, but this one is an object but not really a prototypical inheritance related member. So this is the prototyped member, so which means this is the real inheritance happening, but this is just a wrapper around this guy which tries to pull all the values from the prototype and give us just for our what I say, a better readability, and at the same time a flexible way of accessing the parent without really going through the JavaScript prototype inheritance. So this is just a wrapper and just a convenience object which actually refers to the same parent which has been made available as part of this prototype. Okay, so in that way you can see like this one is actually inheriting from the parent, and we have all the values as I mentioned. And now let me do this. I would like to have a new text box right in here, and let me add a BR tag here, and I would like to say, okay, so this is okay, I'm actually doing the same data binding here also. So let us see what it is doing. So I go back here and press F5, and now you can see the same values are available here. Now I am going to modify this to 100, and now you can see it has modified here, it has modified here, and also it has modified here. So we know that whenever we modify something from the parent, it is going to modify everything to the child or to the nested child as well. Now the fun thing happens. I remove everything and just say 1, and I'm just modifying only A, and now you can see it is just modifying only the child scope, but it is not affecting the parent scope. So this is very important. Whenever you try to modify the value of a parent inside the child scope, you are actually creating a new member inside the child scope which is available only to the child scope, and it will not have any effect on the parent, because you are essentially overriding the member which has been inherited from parent, and you are defining a new member right inside the child. So let us refresh this and let us see the scope again. So let me go to this child scope, and we know that it is going to be having ID as 3, and now it has got C and D, and A being inherited from the parent. So we know what we are doing. Now let us modify this one to something like 9, and let me clear everything and again do this. I open child, we know that it is ID as 3. Now you can see I have a new member called A, and I still have C and D which have been defined earlier, but this new A has been automatically created the moment you tried modifying or you tried adding through the data binding capabilities of the text box. So whenever you are using a text box inside the child controller or child scope, you are essentially using, or say whenever you have the text box with two-way data binding, you are essentially creating a new member inside the child if it doesn't exist. But if it is already existing, it just tries to manipulate the same value. So whenever I say if it doesn't exist as part of the child scope, but it doesn't matter, the text box doesn't understand whether it is being inherited from the parent or the child. The moment you assign something to the text box, it simply adds a new member to the child. But it doesn't mean that the parent is lost. You can see we still have the parent with its own A and B. So we can still have the parent members to be accessible just by writing something like this. So let me write one more. That is probably from sample to parent A. So this is just some text. So I would like to say A equals $parent.a and see what's going on. So I just refresh here, and now you can say I still have $a, which is nothing but 10. So let me have a break here so that we're going to have a better understanding. Now you can see I'm still able to access A here from the parent. So the moment I modify A here, you can see it is being modified everywhere. But the moment I modify directly from the child, you can see it is actually modifying only the child. But still, the parent is made available throughout. So it is still being available here and here and here. So this is pretty much about how we can have the scope from the controller perspective. And there's one more thing, like if you are really working with objects, you will not have those kinds of problems, like you are overwriting the child related members even though those are inherited from the parent. So those kind of things can be excluded if you are really working with objects rather than some primitive values or primitive variables in this case. So let me have another example as such. So I'm going to say something like $scope .o. So this is just an object, and this particular object is going to have two members called p as 100 and q as 200. So I defined just a new object called o, and there is no definition for o here at all. So now let me switch to a01.html. So I just wanted to have a new one. So let me place a br. Let me put two brs here so that we can separate ourselves. So I'm going to say in sample2 I'm actually having p and I'm also having q. So this is pretty important. We are actually defining o, so we need to write o dot and o dot, and even the same thing from the parent as well. So if I would like to have something from the parent, we are actually accessing the same parent object of o dot p, and we are also accessing o dot q. So the same object o is made available to the parent and to the child because the child is inherited. So you're accessing the same members from the parent and also to the child. And let us see if this is working. Just press F5, and now you can see I have this. Okay, I'm still actually doing A and B. I need to modify these captions, but instead the values are directly from P and Q. So I need to modify this P and this one to Q, and let me have a break tag here. And let me have another break tag here so that it gets separated from the previous scope related members. Okay. Now you can see I still have P and Q. Those are also made accessible here. And you have the A, and let me modify the value of P using the same kind whatever I did. So I'm going to modify the value P by just writing o.p and maintain that as part of the text box. And similarly, I would like to have the same thing to be modified even from here. And let us see how it is going to respond. So you're going to have o.p to be modified from the parent, and you have another text box. You are still modifying o.p, which means it is inheriting from the parent. So I clicked the wrong button. Okay, so I refresh this, and now you can see I have o related stuff right in these two, and we have o related stuff right in these two. So now I'm modifying the value of p, and it is being responding almost everywhere wherever p is available. So here and here. So let me take everything off and just have the original value 100. And now let us modify the value of p right inside the child. So even though I'm modifying p here in the child, it doesn't really create a new member, but still it works with the parent member. So it is not going to affect any of the parent whenever you are using an object. So which means you are not going to create a new child related member if you are really working with objects. So in this case you worked with an object, and the child controller knows that it is going to work with this object o, and all you are doing is inside your text box you are working with o.p. So this o is actually being inherited from parent. So AngularJS does know that it doesn't really need to worry about creating a new p because the p already exists as part of o. But in the previous case, that particular child variable a does not exist inside the child scope, so it created it. But in the child scope, even though we are mentioning o.p, it does know that p actually exists from o. So it doesn't really know that o actually comes from parent, but it knows that p actually comes from o. So this is the most important part to be understood whenever you are working with primitive variables at the scope level versus object level. Okay, so this is pretty much the inherited scope or the child scope from the controller's perspective. So let us do something different using directives. So let me remove everything whatever I have in place, or probably I can take a backup of that one. So let me remove everything whatever I have in place except probably a and b or a couple of other variables from this one. So I just wanted to remove everything here, and I wanted to remove this one too. And even in this case I would like to remove everything. So just would like to start with this one. And now I would like to have a new file, and I would like to call this one as something like info.msg. So this is going to be our directive related template. So this is our directive related template, and I would like to have the template to be having a div hope, and I am going to say a and b. So this is pretty much I'm going to have as part of the directive here, and I'm already having a and b inside my controller and the scope. And let me go to this one. So I just wanted to mention this one as controller just for now, and now I would like to have a new div to be created, and I would like to decorate this one with my directive called message. So this is my div decorated with message, and I would like to call this one as something like directive 1 and instance 1. So just for our understanding, and let me create another directive instance as well, and I want to call as 2. So which means you are having two elements using the same directive. So this template gets applied, whatever you put in this info message gets applied through both of these two. So I save this, let me refresh this and see what's going on. Okay, I still have directive instances, whatever we have in place, but I did not define the directive. I forgot to actually create the directive. So I need to create a directive right here. app.directive, and I would like to have the message to be created. And as part of this one, I would like to have a template URL. That is, my directive template is available as part of info message.html. So this is it. So I have my return right here. So this actually makes sure that we are actually using our particular template defined in this info message, which needs to be applied to every element wherever this message gets applied. So let me save this and refresh this. And now you can see I have directive instance 1 with these two values and directive instance 2 with these two values as well. So let me have a break, or probably a HR, so that we'll have a better understanding here. Okay, so let me refresh this. So this is my parent, that is the controller, the main controller where it has been defined, and inside that I have two directive instances, and each of those directives are nothing but the instances of the same directive called message, and they are actually displaying the values directly from the scope. And now we need to understand what kind of scope it is currently having. Is it a shared scope or an inherited scope? So let us go to the parent first, inspect this, and okay, so we are inside the parent, and let us see the parent. The parent related scope is having an ID as 2, and it has got 2 members. So let me clear everything. I go to directive instance, go to inspect. Okay, so let me go directly to this element. So let me see if it can select it. Yes. Okay, now I go to the scope of this Y, And now you can see you are still using the same directive as of the parent because it is currently using the shared scope. So which means no child scope has been created, but both of these directives are still using the parent related scope. So you can see you're still going to use the same thing. No child scope has been created in any of those scenarios because you did not write scope equal to true. The moment you say scope equal to true, a new child scope will be created for each of those. So let me refresh this. So you are not going to find any difference here, but let me go to inspect, and now I say, you can see I have id as 3 and it has got a prototype, and let me open the parent, and you can see from the prototype you can see it is inheriting from the parent called id. So you have the parent one as id 2, the child as id 3, and let me go to another directive. Let me clear everything, and if you open this guy you are going to see id as 4. So this one is 2, 3 and 4. Where is this 4 coming from? Even if you see this id 4 is having a prototypical inheritance from the parent 2, which is nothing but this parent. So any number of directives you define here, as long as it is mentioned as scope equal to true, it actually inherits from its parent. Not necessarily be a controller, but it inherits from its own parent. So in that way you can see we can have the scope related inheritance in the directives. If you do not write scope at all, it is going to be a shared scope, or even if you write this one as false, it is going to be shared scope. That is pretty important. And let me define the scope as usual, and let me go a bit more. So I would like to have a new controller to be defined, that is the directive based controller, where I would like to define my own members to the child scope. So the controller is automatically provided with a scope, element and attributes. So those are the default parameters available for any directive controller. And now this scope is nothing but the child scope. So if you would like to provide new members to your directive, you can actually use this dollar scope. So this dollar scope is actually the parent scope, which is A and B, and this is nothing but the child scope, which is actually inheriting from this parent. So this child scope is already having A and B, and on top of that I would like to have scope.c equals 100. So which means I am defining a new member called C inside the child scope. So let me switch back to info and let me add something new called C equals C. So in that way I would like to have even the C also to be displayed as part of my HTML. So there's no difference here. So let me go back here and press F5, and now you can see I have defined C, and C is available to both of the directives as because it is the default member which gets created automatically as part of the directive related controller. So I go to inspect here and I go to scope, and the moment I open it you can see it is the child scope with ID 3 and it has got a new member called C. However, it is still being inherited from the parent 2 with the A and B automatically being rendered here. So in that way I have my controller, so that is the directive based controller right here, which actually defines a new scope. And let me enhance this a bit. I would like to have something like scope.change value b. So this is just a method, and as part of this one I would like to modify the value of b here, and I would like to modify the value of b to something like 30. Similarly, I would like to have one more method inside this one and call this one as change value a, and in this case I would like to have the a value as 5, and let me add even b as well. Okay, I would like to hold on the b. So let us see, I have a, so let let me comment this a bit. Let us work with B first. So I would like to have the B to be executed. So which means I need to call this function. So in order to call this, I need to have a kind of a button or something which can actually trigger that event. So I would like to have button ng click equals, so what is the value I have in here? I have change value B, and I would like to execute that, and I would like to call this one as something like change value B as the caption, and that's the button. So let us see where all it is going to affect. So I'm going to come back here and press F5. Now you can see I have change value B, and the moment I say change value B, you can see it changed 30 here and 30 here and 30 here, because B is available at the parent and the child scopes are actually inheriting from the parent. The moment you modify the parent related member, it is going to affect all the children. So that is the quickest way on how you can really modify a value from the parent, and the same value gets affected throughout the children or the hierarchy. So if I would like to have something similar for the child, so this one can have its own child as well. So currently, let me say I would like to have B. So let me not work with A at all. So I would like to have B, and I'm saying that please modify the value of B to 5. And in this case, the child scope doesn't have a member called B. It is just inheriting a member from the parent. But whenever I say B equals 5 from the child scope, it is going to create a new member by overriding the member available in the parent. So we're going to check that by modifying our info.message with its own button. So let me go in here, and I am going to have a button to be made available here, and this is going to be called as change value B, and this is going to be change value B as well. So there is also one more important thing. You are overriding the definition of the parent with the definition in the child. So that is also important. So for example, if you are going to have the A as I deleted earlier, so let me have A here as 5 and B value as 45. So I wanted to call this one as A. So let me see what's going on. So in this case, I just wanted to execute. Let me have both A as well. So I put A and B, which are actually calling A and B respectively, and these are being executed right from the child. So let me go back here and press F5. So we are calling change value B from the parent. So let us see this. And now you can see B value has been modified from the parent. Now we are saying that please modify the value of A. So at this moment, let us see what are all the things available inside the child. So I go in here, get the members out, and now you can see all it has got is just C. And of course it has got A and B from the parent with the values 10 and 30. So those are the values which are being displayed. So in this case, I'm trying to change the value of A, and the moment I click on this A, you can see it is supposed to assign the value of 5 to scope A. So the moment I do this, yes, it indeed modified the value of A to 5, but it did not get effect in the parent nor even any other children. So let me clear this again and see what's going on. So I open here, and now you can see the child scope has got a new member called A5, which is overriding the member available inside the parent. So but the moment I go in here, it is having its own child scope, and it doesn't have A there because it is directly inheriting from the parent. So this child is having its own value or its own member which has been overwritten from the parent related scope, and thus this A became local to its own child, and it doesn't affect any of the values in the parent nor even in the other children. And let us say about this guy, change value B, and this is also something like B equal to 45. This is going to affect to its own scope just like A. But there is one important thing. You are not just modifying B, you are also modifying the definition of change value be available in the parent. So the parent parent related function is already available to the children. However, you are overriding the same definition with some new definition here. So in that way, it is not just the members like A or B. You can also override the functions or objects or primitive values or any kind of members in general. So in this case, B. So if I do this, so you can see immediately I do not have B here, but the moment I say B, you can see it just modified only related to the current child scope, but it doesn't have any effect on any of the parent or its siblings. So let me again do this on the current one, and you can see a new member B has been created exclusively, and this has got no effect on the parent even though the parent says it has got 30. So in that way, we can have the directives to have the scope to be inherited from the parents. So there are a couple more important things we need to worry about whenever we are working with ng include or ng repeat and so on. So that is also important. So let me take a backup of these two, or probably all the three, and let me remove everything other than a couple. So I am having 10, 20, 30, so I just wanted to leave like that. And imagine I am just removing this whole thing. I removed scope equal to true also. So which means now whenever you use this directive message anywhere else, you are going to treat that message directive to be using the shared scope but not the inherited scope. So that is important. So I save this, and in the message I'm not going to modify anything here, and I just wanted to remove everything. So from A01 perspective, let me remove everything here. So I change value B, let me have that, and message I would like to have here too, and let us see how it goes. Okay, so right now, as I mentioned, I am using the message directive with no scope equal to true, so which means it is supposed to be using the same shared scope. So let me go back here and make sure that we have everything in place. Yes, we have 10 and 20, and these two are supposed to be not inheriting. It is supposed to be having the shared scope. So let me make sure that those are still having the shared scope here. Now you can see it is still using the parent related scope with A and B, and the prototype is not really with respect to the parent here. Okay, now the moment I click on change value B, you can see it is actually changing all the three. So there is no difference, nothing much here actually discussing about child scope. But now let us consider, instead of using the directive called message, I would like to have this template to be directly included as part of my markup. So I can easily do that by using div, and I can say ng include, and I'm saying that please include from info message.html. So I'm actually including a template. So I'm saying that please get my template right at this location. So let me have another break here. So these two are actually called as directives, but this one is not really a directive. We are just saying that please get this template right into this. That's it. So whether or not I actually have this directive, that doesn't matter. So let me actually comment this one just for our understanding. So let me comment these two as well. Okay, I need to actually close this. So that is a mistake. So I go back here and press F5, and now you can see I got A and B, which are actually being displayed directly from the template. So the moment I modify change B, you can see this is being still applied from the parent even to the child as well. So everything is working fine. But let me take this one off. So I would like to have the directives also to be in place. And you can see, by the way, this is not a child directive, as because there is no scope equal to true is provided here, and I would like to remove this one as well. So I modified everything. I go back here and press F5, and now you can see I have both of the directives, and this one is just a template. So let me put even the template also there so that we'll have some understanding about what it is doing. Okay, so these two are directly from the directives and this one is from the template. So let me see the ID of the parent. So the ID of the parent is 2. The ID of the child in this case is 2 because we are using the shared scope, and obviously this will also be 2. This will also be 2 because it's also the shared scope. And let me see this one. This is interesting. Now I see this template and now this is 3. So ng include, whenever you use ng include, it doesn't use shared scope. It actually uses inherited scope. And again, this id3 is actually inheriting from id2 and it has got a and b. So that is one of the points I would like to make. So whenever you use ng include, you have to understand that it actually creates a new scope on its own. And that scope is actually a child scope which gets inherited from the parent scope. Okay. And similarly, whenever you use ng repeat as well. So if I say something like I would like to have a template, the directive message to be applied for every iteration whatever we have in place for some collection. So in this case I am going to say something like 3. So what I'm saying here is that I would like to have this div to be repeated for 3 times, as because I have only 3 items in this collection. So for each of those divs I would like to have this directive message to be applied. So this is a different case. Even though I'm using message here, in this case it doesn't have the shared scope. But even though I'm using the message here, it still has the child scope. In this case I have a shared scope. In this case I am having the child scope because the child scope is not getting created from the directive, but it is actually getting created from the ng repeat. That is important. Again, if you go back to the definition of message, you do not have scope equal to true. You are saying that this message has to use the shared scope by default. It is still using child scope. However, the moment you attach that with the ng repeat creates a child scope for each of those iterations of that particular div, whether or not our particular message directive really cares about. So our message directive thinks that it is working with shared scope, but indeed it actually gets the child scope from the ng repeat. So let us see how it works. So press F5 and now you can see I have 3 values here. So let me go in here. I get this. We know that this is going to have its own child scope and it is called id equal to 6 and it is inheriting from the parent called id2. And let me do the same thing from here, probably this. I remove everything, I go in here and let me see. You can see the id as 3 and let me open the prototype and you can see id3 actually inheriting from id2, so it has got its own child scope. But if you go to the other one, which is this guy, it is not going to have any child scope there, but indeed it works with the shared scope because the scope value is false or no scope value has been provided, and thus this one works with child scope. And all of these these two will be working with shared scope, and all of these will be working with child scope because they are part of ng repeat, and this is also part of child scope because you are using ng include. So whether or not you use scope value as true, you are going to have the child scope based on how you are really using with other directives like ng repeat, ng switch, ng include and so on. So it doesn't mean like every time you will be under control, but based on the respective usage of the respective directives, the existing directives may also be using child scopes even though they might be defined as shared scopes.